Hello, hello. I shared something in my stories today that was kind of pricking at me throughout the day that I wanted to talk a little bit more about it. And I thought it'd be great to maybe make a video and post it on here. So, what I was kind of saying is that there's been a lot of things coming up for me, just like things to be dealt with, like patterning, like behaviors, certain reactions that I knew are not well integrated, that are not they're not fully conscious, they're not coming from my adult, mature self, but there's some programming there that's like working. And the intensity with which it's been coming up is really telling me that it's wanting to be alchemized, or it's wanting to be looked at more deeply. And this has been happening from probably like the beginning of the year, but I'm also pregnant, so it's certainly its own initiation. And in my experience, it has magnified and brought to a surface a lot of things that I was maybe touching on the surface before, or patterning that I was looking at, but I wasn't able to see as clearly before. And when I say see as clearly, I couldn't quite kind of track the thread of exactly where it was coming from, and the root space of it. And in the last little while, there's this one particular thread that I was able to touch really like at its root. And I sat with it a lot, and I know I need to sit with it a lot more and sit with myself in that spot a lot more. And what I was saying is that I do have some kind of built-in spaciousness that is coming in the next few weeks, where I'll have a lot more time to have, my house to myself, where I don't need to be running around or doing anything, where I would really like to use intentionally to delve into some of these things that have really been asking for more intention. And, for those of you who read my writing and who know some of my work from elsewhere, you have probably heard me say that for me, this type of work happens on the daily. It's just being a constant witness and bringing constant consciousness and awareness to each moment. And I like to work with things as they come up. And it's not always that deep, but I always work with it. When something comes up, I will work with it. Just to myself, or if I have, I'm in the shower, or I have a few minutes to myself, or before bed, or whenever, right, literally in the moment, whenever it is. It's a very in-life living meditation practice for me, which, is maybe not as sensational and exciting as people. It'd be awesome to be like, I did this one thing and like, poof, it was gone. But it's really a way of living, as opposed to these really, what do I want to call them, exceptional or sensationalized one-time experiences that just like clears everything. There's a place for that, but it happens very within life, and it can be really slow to get to the root thing. Nothing I do comes from force, or forcing myself to go places that I don't feel ready to go, or that aren't fully clear yet, or anything like that. But this one particular thread opened up for me, and I've been working with it up until now, and I will be working with it a bit more as we move forward. And today what I'm doing is working with my birth story in particular, and it's something I had my mom write me out some time ago, and I finally feel ready to kind of like look at it a bit more. And I already kind of knew what was going to be the stickler point of where there was this particular pattern that stemmed back from that initial experience that I had. And alas, that after kind of reading it through, that's what really came through for me. But what I wanted to talk about more, because I realized I said I will be working with my birth story, and I wanted to talk about stories in general, about our life and about our history, and how we use them or don't use them in at least the kind of transformational work maybe that I do. and certainly that I do with myself. Stories can be like really tricky because it's not that they're not important, but there's a way where like stories can be identity based, and where we're really attached to stories, and they're like mental masturbation. Like we continue to tell them and kind of, or like think them in our mind and just like replay them and replay them and replay them, and it's like this addiction of the sensation that it brings up for us. The cleanest thing to work with is actually energy and sensation. That's the like purest form of the thing that you're trying to heal, because like trauma and wounding and all of these things are really energy that got stuck somewhere. It didn't have a full resolution. It didn't go out to completion, and then it stayed somewhere. We stagnated in our development, it stagnated in our body, and now we're kind of repeating that pattern. And it can look a million different ways in our life now, which is why it's not always clear to understand what is this particular thing. Like, where is this thing coming from that I do or that I think or that I believe? So I find it really helpful, and certainly with myself, what I've been doing a lot more, particularly in the last 2 years, is detaching from story, or at least questioning it a lot more. Or when it comes up in my mind, because it will, our mind likes to do that. Our mind likes stories because our mind likes meaning making. But there is a detachment that I feel to it. That's not the most important thing I'm working with. The most important thing I'm actually working with is the sensation that was opened, the energy that was open, and building a capacity to hold it. Building capacity and capability to go deeper into it, to really lean into it, to give it its completion that it needed. Whether it's I need to cry it out, whether it's I need to harness my rage somewhere, I need to do some somatic movements to like really literally physically move it out, kind of whatever that is. But the story, I've created a lot of space with story. And I just wanted to say that because I realized that I had kind of said that I'm working with birth story. Now, with working with birth stories in specific, I do think is really helpful, because those early experiences, I mean, we can go into preconception too, but from birth and those like just really early months and few years are likely where a lot of our, like if we go to the root of a certain thread we're following, it probably started there. And it can give us a lot of information if we can kind of hear, if that's accessible to us. It's not accessible to everybody. But if we can hear what may have happened, and even have experiences, which I also work with, to kind of take ourselves back there. Like, what was it like? What did we feel? What did we move through? Like, can you visually see that? For example, I was working with, and I could feel it very strongly in my body, what it felt like to be just kind of like abruptly physically born. Like I didn't land in my body. I couldn't feel my mom. I couldn't feel her in her body, like embodied, nor could I feel her physically because I wasn't with her. And to be immediately taken away and like had nobody, like the disorientation, the terror, the fear of like what the heck is going on, and tracking it to certain patterns that I'm experiencing now, for example. So even like working with that like little one and rewiring those connections a little bit, especially as I'm moving closer and closer to my birth experience. Really important caveat. When I work with my own birth story, or when I hear even other people's birth stories, which I do love to hear, as long as somebody's not coming from a place where they want to tell their kind of like horror stories. I really have a boundary around, like I don't want that in my field. I don't find it helpful in such a like mentally vulnerable time. But, you know, to hear people's stories, or to hear where I was intentionally working with my own birth story, I had a really energetic protection around me where I wasn't attaching to that story and feeling like, well, you know, that's so identified to it that I would repeat it. Or so identified to it feeling like, well, that's just like the legacy of my family now. It was purely like factual. Okay, okay, it helps me understand some things. It helps me see some things. It helps me see how I can work with myself here. It helps me understand how to communicate some things and about how I want to be supported during a certain time. It helps me know how I can support myself, but I'm not overly attached to it. And that's really, really, really important. So when working with our own story of this sort, as well as working with others, because that's the tricky part, like I said in the beginning, with working with stories, and how sometimes when I work with patterning and behaviors and beliefs, we obviously touch on story because it's just how we communicate, and they are things that happened, and it's not necessarily wrong, but I try to be really mindful of stripping that like attachment to it. And certainly the identity piece, where you identify to it, that is the most harmful thing, because that is what will keep you stuck, because it's giving you something. You may think it's a shitty story, I hate that that happened, but it's given you some sort of meaning. And it's necessary for some part of your identity, your egoic identity, so it will be hard to let go of. Which is why when we want to either try to remove the story when we're able to do that and just work with this pure sensation and with the pure energy, okay? Or, it's there, we don't fight it, there's no resistance in this, but we have like this space between it. It's like, yeah, I get my mind's going there, and, that happened. I have a memory of it. And by the way, our memories and perceptions are not always also 100% accurate. And it could be feeding into a belief that like sometimes could be true and sometimes could be not true, right? We've just probably told it so many times, and that's the way we experienced it and saw it. So that's what's truth to us. But those stories are not true truth. Truth with a capital T, right? So that's the caveat I just wanted to make, and I think it's a useful teaching and something to kind of just keep in the back of your mind also in how you do this work, and maybe pay attention for the next little while and see, what stories do I tell often? What stories do I feel really attached to? What stories bring up so much sensation where I could feel like I'm experiencing that right now? And is it possible for me to start just building a bit of space between me and story? Or can I loosen the grip around those stories a little bit, create some spaciousness, and see, can I sit with the sensation even a little bit more than I could before, and rebuild capacity through doing that? And if that sensation has reached its conclusion, or that energetic, or whatever we want to call it, we can let it go. Which is why I said sometimes the stories can be like a mental masturbation, because it's something we don't want to let go. Sometimes. They might not be conscious. It's probably not conscious. You're not sitting there wanting that. But it's the familiarity and almost the addiction to that sensation. To like feeling violated, or feeling angry, or feeling like just crying, or feeling victimized. That's a big one. Let me know how this lands for you, how you understand it or perceive it, and how you see yourself potentially working with this teaching, and how you could see your a potential shift happening with some of these stories that you maybe are telling yourself often.